Well, I think it's now known because of public filings that PPC had quite a bit to do with that petition. So you're really asking, so how come PPC, succeeded when nobody else did? Well, the answer was because there was money, and because proper agricultural methods were used. I mean, it wasn't perfect, but we planted proper seed corn, and we watered it properly, and we, collected it on time, and we, stored it properly, and modern agriculture really does a good job of squeezing a lot of food out of 1 acre of ground, and that wasn't easy. People here at PPC worked really hard at it. It was not trivial, but if you apply enough money and you are careful enough, it is possible to collect about 25, or maybe we could have gotten to 30% of the gubernatorial vote before it just played out. There was also, of course, a very substantial volunteer component there, but the volunteer component would not have been sufficient by itself. It was necessary to canvass the whole district door to door, carefully keeping accurate records. And that was done because money was available to pay for it, and because there was office staff sufficient to control the whole process. And sure enough, it worked. And if you take the Paul Scott recall and you scale it up to be a Rick Snyder recall, there are some differences between the two. I mean, just because the state is not identical to House District 51, and because the public opinion of the governor is not identical to the public opinion of Paul Scott, but it would still be possible to apply the same methods to the gubernatorial recall if you spent 100 times as much money. And sure enough, 100 times as much money would get you to some number really close to $6 million. Yogi Berra supposedly once said, "Predictions are always hard, and especially about the future." So, I bet the way that recalls work is that there's usually a little bit of a public backlash against a recall election. People sort of feel like they're not proper, they're not really a good idea. Partly that's driven by Michigan law, where you have a person on the ballot running, in effect, against an indictment of them. A charge that's on the ballot that says, why, that person did so-and-so. And the candidate involved is allowed to rebut it and to spend a month or 2 months or 3 months pounding away, saying, I didn't do it, they lied about it, I apologize for having done it. In other words, they get to adjust their public stance to deal with the terms under which they've been charged, and that charge was levied 6 months earlier. And so it may no longer mean much to the public, and it may be possible to sidestep it. So recalls tend to lose favor over time. So if you start with an overwhelming support, you can recall somebody. But if you start with a roughly evenly matched support, the official usually succeeds, usually survives. I don't know if that'll happen in Paul Scott's case, but I would say that it wouldn't surprise me if, in the end, it's a kind of a bitter election and he survives. Well, I wouldn't say only a few Republicans lost their seats. Every state's laws are very different pertaining to elections. And so even though all over the country we use the same language to describe political events, what actually goes on in each state is very different from one state to the next because they have their own history and their own set of provisions in state law which determine how these things proceed. Wisconsin law is very different than Michigan, even though the words are all the same. We talk about recall, we talk about state senate, and so forth. But the actual provisions of Wisconsin law are very different. Only a handful of people, about 16 members of the state senate, were even eligible for recall. No one in the assembly was eligible for recall, the 99 people there. And half of the state senate wasn't eligible. And even of the state senate, the only people eligible for recall were the people elected during the Obama landslide in 2008. And because of that, all the weak Republicans had already been knocked off. And so the only Republicans who could be recalled in this last round The only people in the state available were the ones who had survived the Obama recall. Not recall, the Obama landslide. As a result, they were very tough targets. And the Democrats knocked off 2 of them anyway. Okay? Now the whole assembly is up, they can start collecting signatures about a month from now. And the rest of the state Senate is up, including the people who were elected in 2010. And many of much softer Republican targets are available. On top of that, the Democrats and the unions in the state have tasted blood because they've now pushed the Republicans so they only have a 1-seat majority in the state Senate. If they get 1 more seat, they actually take control of the state Senate from the Republicans. So I would say that I think that it's likely the Democrats will do quite well there. The Democrats they have armies of people willing to carry petitions. They've worked all the bugs out of the system. They know that they can succeed, and they know they're within 1 vote of picking up the state Senate and then maybe actually chipping away at the Republican dominance of the state assembly. And there's just nothing stopping them. I mean, the Republicans, I think, are fearful. I think that the Democrats have them on their heels. It's important to know that there's a very big difference in Wisconsin law from Michigan law on recall. And that difference is that in Michigan, there's a question that's placed in the ballot: shall X be recalled from office? Shall Paul Scott be recalled from office? And so you have a choice for the voters. Has so-and-so done such a bad job that he should actually be removed from his office early? And so that's a harder question than electing him in the first place, because he's now running against not an opponent, but just, the image of what a proper public official should be. And if he apologizes a little bit or explains what he's done, he may very well be able to survive even in a fairly hostile electorate. But in Wisconsin, the question that's placed in the ballot is simply a new election. You collect enough signatures, and you have a Democratic candidate, a Republican candidate for state Senate. And the Republican has taken all this guff for the last 3 months as people were out circulating petitions to get them on the ballot. There are all these people griping about him, and he's there defending himself. Well, you never really want to defend yourself in an election. And the Democrat is somebody off to the side, able to, not in office or maybe holds a different office, can be somebody who's relatively popular and has not been beaten up in the press, hasn't been accused of whatever it is that everybody's been accused of. And so the public isn't judging, has this person done such a bad job they should be removed, but rather, well, I have the incumbent and I have this challenger, and the challenger seems nice enough. Who do I support now? Well, this guy's had a chance. Maybe I try this other person. And so it's possible to win a recall election in Wisconsin, to remove somebody, with a weaker case, with a less favorable electorate than in Michigan. Michigan sets a higher threshold to win. It's a higher set of barriers because of the requirement to win an election. Also in Michigan, the person on the ballot can argue, well, if this recall is approved, then there will have to be a special primary election and a special general election. What will you have accomplished? Because my term is, for this assembly, my term will be 2/3 up anyway. So what will you have accomplished to remove me from office 5 months early, right? And then you'll have to go through the whole process of electing somebody, and next year there's an election anyway, right? In the Paul Scott case, he'll be able to say, you won't even be represented until May, right? And so if you remove me in November of 2011, for 5 months or 6 months, you won't be represented at all. And if you just wait until next year, you have another shot at me anyway. Well, in Wisconsin, it's a completely different situation. In Wisconsin, the question is, well, right now, do you want, in effect, Paul Scott, or do you want the challenger? And you hold the election, and a week later, you got a new state senator. Well, they knocked off 2 Republicans who were pretty well entrenched. I think they can probably get 2 or 3 more.